What's up guys? So this video is going to be on putting an alternator in your Mark 6 Jetta with a TDI. So mine is a 2012. It's got the CJ motor. It's a manual trans, not that that matters. This video is going to be into two parts. The first part is going to be actually me putting the alternator in. I'm doing a bigger alternator from Brand X so that I have more power for my stereo system. So that's my reasoning for doing it. And then the second part of the video is going to be upgrading my wiring to handle the power that this alternator is now making. It's a huge alternator, big upgrade, so let's get into it. I've got the front of the car all torn down, well, obviously to this point. Mainly the only thing that really came off is the bumper, the grille, those upper supports, and the headlights. So it's pretty simple stuff. There's just a bunch of Torx bits all over the place, and everything comes off, so nothing too complex. I got looking at it and thinking about it, and I think that all I need to do is just open this top gap. So I'm gonna try just leaning it out. So taking out the top two on each side and just loosening the bottom two. There shouldn't be anything stopping me from just taking this thing and leaning it out. And then that should give me plenty of room. If I can move this AC line or get around it, I can probably just get in through there. If I can open this up another few inches, I should be able to get in there and do that pretty easily, I think. So I think my plan's gonna work. I just took the rest of the bolts out, loosened the lower ones, and I think I've got enough room now that I can snake that thing out of there. So I'm gonna get on to taking the belt off, because I've got to replace that with a shorter one, and getting this thing unhooked, getting the battery undone, obviously. See if I can't yank this thing out of here. The belt is off. It is a 16mm wrench to get onto that tensioner to loosen up the belt. There's a bolt in that little opening there, and there's a bolt down there. Now I rocked the alternator out a little, so it's in a little bit different position, but those are both 13s. The bolt or the nut for the power wire is a 13, and then for this connector it was kind of a pain, but you can take a screwdriver, stick in that little opening right above my finger, pry it open, and then you can take another screwdriver and put between the front of that case and the alt and pry out, and it'll pop that off, and that'll do that pretty easily. So I just took a pry bar and pried it out. So at this point I'm going to try to deliver this little guy out of here. So I had a little bit of a struggle getting it loosened up off that bottom mount, and then there is an 8mm nut that you have to take off here to loosen up the wiring harness. But other than that, it's looking like I should be able to just kind of pull this thing out. I was able to just take that alternator, rotate it up, and then it came right on out. So that was incredibly smooth. That was a lot easier than I've seen it done online. I think having it leaned out like this is by far the easiest way to do it. I might be wrong, but I've only seen people do it with the front end off or swung out. I think doing it this way is incredibly easy. Just having those two bolts out on each side, and then having the bottom two loose on each side. You just disconnect the hood latch and you're ready to roll. I mean, that makes this a really, really fast job. So I'm gonna get the mounts sanded down, get the rust off of them, have a little look down here, see if I see anything out of place. So the new alternator is in. It's just the inverse. I took the alternator, put it in with the pulleys up, dropped it in, rotated it, and kind of just slid it down into position. On this alternator, the power line is in a different spot, and so is the wiring connector, and it's really close to the AC line. So I don't know, I might try bending that over. I don't know if that's really a good idea. The last thing I want is to kink it. I have the cap that the factory one put over this, so maybe I'll just be able to use that. But for right now, I'm just going to hook it up with all the stock wiring. I'm not going to put any of my wiring on it just because I want to make sure it just, you know, works first. I'm probably just gonna close this up and then start it up, you know, let it get some runtime on it, make sure everything's charging and looking correct. I got it all tightened down. The only thing left now is the belt. I've got to put on it yet, so I got to figure out which belt length I need. All right, I got my belt on it. It seems to be happy. I'm getting 14.26 here and 14.18 there, so about a 0.1 volt drop. That's going through the fuse block though. It's fused through the distribution block there. I'm gonna let it run for a bit, but so far it looks like it's doing good. I'm pretty happy with that. Once it got warmed up, it seemed to be charging around 14.1 at the alt, 14 flat at the battery. I was a little surprised that it wasn't charging higher into 14 volts, like 14.6. So I sent the manufacturer a message and just asked if that's normal. Told them what all I did, what happened. So I'm still waiting on a response, but I suspect that that'll be fine. I'm not too worried about 14.1 volts once it gets hot. That's pretty good. So again, if you didn't watch the first video on this system that I'm putting into this car, this is a Brand X Alternator. It is a 370 amp alt. When he sent me the dyno sheet for when he built this, it actually dynoed at 401 amps. So that is a lot of power, man. 400 amps is ridiculous. So the factory amp in this car, or sorry, the factory alt in this car does 140. So, you know, 3 times the power or whatever. That is a huge increase. So before I get into the wiring, this is the belt I used. That's the part number. You can look this guy up on Rock Auto and you should be able to find it. I think it's right at or just under the stock belt, but it fit perfectly. As it stretches, I'll see how it goes. I might need to run a shorter one, but I've got a few over there, so it'll work out. But for right now, this is the belt I'm using. Now that this is good, I've got the front pulled back forward and I'm getting ready to start running wires from the amp. Sorry, I keep messing that up. The alt to the battery so that I can get this all folded back up, clean up the engine bay, and be done up here. And this is the wire we're going to be using. So I've got 4 lines of 2-aught cable there. They're about 25 foot long, so I'll be running 2 negatives and 2 positives from the front battery to the rear battery. And then for all my amp wiring and the wiring up front, I've got a 5th line that I'm going to be using. So like I said, this is all 2-aught wire. Let's see if I can find it on the cable here. There it is, right by my thumb. Oh, focus. You can kind of see it, 2-aught. So again, it's all copper. This is big wire. It's heavy. So I'm going to be running 2 lines of it off the alternator up to the battery, and then somewhere I'm going to be grounding from the engine or the alt to the battery as well. So since I do not have a hydraulic crimper, I have one of these hammer type crimpers, and I think for us hobbyists they are probably the best option. But I like getting crimps that have a solid front here, because then you can take heat shrink that has adhesive in it, glue, and by the time you put that over this connection here, that completely makes the water sealed off from the environment. So if you go underwater or get in salt, whatever, it will not affect the copper wire. It'll only eat at the end of the terminal, which is nice. So I highly recommend getting heat shrink with glue in it. And then that sort of lug, these are from Windy Nation. I think it's the same brand that Home Depot sells, but I just bought them from Windy Nation themselves online, and I got heat shrink from them as well. It's a pretty alright price. So I'm just working my way through doing cables. I'm gonna start getting this stuff ran up in the car. So the car is all put back together, as you can see. So I skipped forward a bit from last night. It was starting to get dark and I really wanted to get this together and just verify that what I've done here is all going to work, because I've got a road trip that I'm going on tomorrow. So to go through what I did, obviously the alternator is in. There is a factory power line that comes off the alternator that goes up into the fuse block, and then out of the fuse block, that wire right there feeds the battery. So it's fused in there to the battery, and then you see that other black wire right there, that goes down to the starter. So then all the orange wires are what I have added. So we've got a battery to the cabin, the cab, the frame, since this is a unibody, whatever you want to call it. So then I've got 2 grounds as well coming off there that go down to the grounding lug from where the starter is at. So between the case on the alternator to that point, there is 0.01 ohms. So there's no resistance difference between there. That meaning that's a good ground. You want to have no increase in resistance wherever you're grounding at. You really want to make sure your alternator is grounded. If your alternator is not grounded, then you're wasting your power that you paid for. So those 2 lines there are my grounds, and obviously I've got 2 wires going to the alternator for my positive as well. So that takes care of all that. I'm going to be running 2 leads of negative back to my amps, because again, this is all for my stereo system. I'm going to be running 2 leads of positive back. So if I was not doing that, I would be running more leads to my body to ground it. If it is a truck or a vehicle with a frame, I would recommend grounding all the way to the frame, and then once you get back to your amplifiers, drill a hole in your cab and then go up from the frame. I really, personal opinion, I don't like grounding on unibody cars. You know, some cars they use glue, they don't really weld them together, and it's just, I personally feel a lot better just either running a wire all the way to the amp or running it to the frame. So in my case, I'm running the wires like I said. But overall, this was a pretty easy install. I really think that how I did it, just leaning that core, this front part forward, made it a whole lot easier than what I've seen. So if you get to this point, I appreciate you guys watching. Have a great day.